Imagine being on a flight, minding your own business, when suddenly the person sitting next to you, a high-powered CEO, starts mocking someone. A single dad, quietly doing his best. Most of us would just cringe, maybe look away. But then, an announcement cuts through the hum of the cabin. Any fighter pilot on board? And suddenly, the entire dynamic changes. What happens next? That's the story we're about to uncover. About judgment, courage, and unexpected heroism in the most unlikely moments. The cabin of the airplane was quiet, the usual low hum of engines and occasional rustle of passengers shifting in their seats, creating a subdued background. It was the kind of flight that, for most people, felt almost meditative, a pause between one part of life and the next, and yet in that same quiet, subtle dramas were unfolding that often went unnoticed. In one of the middle rows, a single dad settled into his seat, his hands slightly worn from years of balancing work and parenthood, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who had learned to manage responsibility without complaint. Beside him, a man whose presence seemed to demand attention, the kind of person who radiates authority the moment they walk into a room, slid into his seat. A CEO, as his name tag subtly implied, dressed in a sharply tailored suit, polished shoes catching the overhead lights, someone who seemed used to having the world respond to his slightest word. From the very first moments, it was clear that the energy between these two men was different, and not in the way that you would immediately notice. The single dad was quiet, organized, checking his boarding pass carefully, making sure his child's belongings were in order. There was a gentle precision in his movements, a rhythm of someone who had long learned to anticipate problems before they occurred, and in doing so, minimize conflict in his life. The CEO, on the other hand, exuded a kind of confidence that teetered on arrogance, a sharpness in his eyes that scanned the cabin as though he were assessing the worth of everyone present. He adjusted his cufflinks, tilted his head, and then, casually, almost imperceptibly at first, made a comment that set the tone of what would follow. It started small, a quiet chuckle, a remark about the single dad's attire or the way he had packed his bag. Nothing that anyone outside their row would likely hear, yet sharp enough to create tension. The single dad, sensing the undercurrent, did not respond at first. He had learned long ago that reacting to every slight, every judgmental glance, only gave unnecessary power to people who thrived on putting others down. Instead, he focused on his child, checking that the small tablet was loaded with games and stories, making sure the snacks were within reach, and occasionally glancing at the magazine he had brought to pass the time. His calm demeanor was deliberate, a shield forged from years of navigating judgment and misunderstanding in the world, a way to keep himself grounded in the midst of others' assumptions. But the CEO was not deterred. The man seemed to feed on these little assertions of superiority, small cracks in the armor of those around him that he could exploit with humor or sarcasm. His comments became more pointed, aimed at drawing attention from anyone who might overhear, to amplify the contrast between his own apparent success and the single dad's perceived simplicity. "I don't see how you manage," he said in a voice loud enough that a few nearby passengers shifted in their seats. "Just traveling with one kid must be exhausting." There was a smirk, the kind of expression that spoke of a man used to having power acknowledged, whether earned or not, and yet it lacked awareness of the quiet dignity sitting beside him. Passengers in the surrounding rows were beginning to notice the tension, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that is hard to describe but easy to feel. In a confined space like an airplane, the social dynamics become amplified. Every glance, every whispered comment, every gesture takes on a weight it might not have in a larger, more anonymous environment. Some passengers pretended not to notice, scrolling through their phones or pretending to sleep, while others' eyes darted toward the unfolding scene, curiosity mingling with discomfort. The single dad remained steady, his posture relaxed but intentional, projecting a calm that contrasted sharply with the CEO's agitated self-importance. What makes this moment compelling is not only the personalities involved but the context. A flight is a microcosm of society, a temporary community forced into proximity, each passenger carrying their own stories, struggles, and judgments. In this environment, even small interactions can feel magnified, and the social hierarchy the CEO attempted to impose met the natural resilience of someone accustomed to being underestimated. The single dad's very presence, unassuming yet deliberate, became a quiet counterweight to the CEO's need to assert dominance. His focus on his child, his preparation for the journey, and his calm attention to the immediate needs of the moment reflected a kind of competence that the CEO could not reduce to a punchline or a casual observation, and yet the CEO continued, seemingly unaware that his audience extended beyond his immediate companion. There is a certain blindness that power brings, a confidence that the world will respond to one's presence, that humor at another's expense is acceptable, and that the judgments he passed could define the social narrative of the space. He laughed at small things, made gestures that implied condescension, and spoke in a tone that assumed agreement, assuming that his perspective carried weight simply because of his title, his wealth, or the sharpness of his attire. He seemed to have forgotten, or perhaps never realized, that human character is not always evident on the surface, and that appearances can deceive, that resilience is often silent, and courage sometimes invisible to the untrained eye. The CEO's mocking behavior did not occur in isolation. It unfolded as if part of a carefully orchestrated performance, one in which he assumed the role of judge and the single dad the unwilling contestant. From the moment the flight attendants had directed passengers to their seats, the CEO seemed to assess everyone around him with a subtle, almost imperceptible calculation, as though the small confines of the airplane cabin provided a stage for testing the responses of others. The way he leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, and allowed a smug smile to play on his lips, indicated a man comfortable with asserting superiority without overt confrontation. He spoke in a tone that was deliberately louder than necessary, ensuring that each quip landed not just with the intended target but with anyone within earshot, creating a ripple of tension across the nearby rows. He began with small remarks, carefully measuring each one for maximum effect, picking at details in the single dad's appearance, his briefcase, even the way he had folded the small blanket for his child. "Traveling light, I see," he said once, tilting his head as if puzzled, though the comment carried an unmistakable sting. "I suppose efficiency is important when you don't have a team helping you." The words were casual, almost conversational, but carried the weight of judgment, designed to imply incompetence while masking the intent behind polite phrasing. It was the kind of subtle cruelty that thrives in public spaces, where social rules prevent overt confrontation, yet the undercurrent of humiliation seeps through the fabric of civility. The single dad, however, did not respond in kind. He had long learned that reacting to provocation often empowers the aggressor, and his experience as a parent and as someone navigating life largely on his own had taught him that composure is a form of resistance. He adjusted his child's headphones, checked that the tablet battery was charged, and subtly rearranged the snacks without offering even a glance at the CEO's smirk. This calm composure acted as a silent rebuke, a refusal to validate the CEO's attempt at dominance. The quiet dignity with which he carried out these small tasks suggested a life built on resilience, patience, and the daily mastery of challenges that rarely receive public acknowledgement. Yet the CEO persisted, interpreting silence not as strength but as weakness, as an invitation to escalate. He began making broader statements, designed to contrast his own perceived success with what he assumed to be the single dad's deficiencies. "I don't know how single parents do it," he said, voice carrying across the aisle, punctuated with a small laugh that suggested he considered himself both amused and enlightened. "Must be exhausting. I can barely handle my schedule without a team helping me." The words, though casual in tone, carried layers of social judgment, implying that competence, efficiency, and self-worth were somehow measured by external indicators like wealth, position, and the presence of support systems. Around them, the passengers began to sense the tension, some discreetly leaning away, others staring, unsure whether to intervene or remain spectators. In the confined environment of an airplane, the dynamics of social judgment are amplified. Every word, every gesture resonates more strongly because the individuals involved cannot easily escape the scrutiny of the immediate audience. People instinctively pick up on cues, and the CEO's behavior sent a clear signal of hierarchy, while the single dad's calmness projected a different kind of authority. One that was quieter, harder to measure, and perhaps more enduring because it arose from personal experience rather than position. The CEO's laughter, though controlled, held a sharp edge, and he seemed to enjoy the discomfort he provoked, mistaking surface-level tension for dominance. He glanced around, expecting affirmation, subtle nods from nearby passengers, or at least acknowledgement that his behavior carried weight. What he did not recognize was that his assumptions about social validation were limited. He measured respect through visibility and reaction, while the single dad's life had been measured through endurance, adaptability, and the quiet management of responsibilities that do not come with public applause. As the flight continued, the CEO escalated, making pointed remarks about parenting choices, the apparent simplicity of a single-parent routine, and even commenting on small, mundane errors in preparation for the flight, as though these minor details reflected larger failures of character. He spoke in a tone that suggested he believed he was teaching a lesson, not recognizing that lessons are not always received in the way they are delivered, and that the silent confidence of someone used to navigating life's challenges independently can be far more compelling than sarcasm or condescension. The single dad maintained a composed demeanor, leaning slightly forward to check on his child, occasionally adjusting the seatbelt, and maintaining an attentiveness to details that spoke volumes about his priorities. This deliberate focus on responsibility, care, and preparation contrasted sharply with the CEO's performative arrogance, highlighting a distinction between superficial authority and real capability. In that moment, the cabin became a stage on which two very different interpretations of competence and social power were displayed. One loud, visible, and performative, the other quiet, grounded, and resilient, and the contrast was palpable to anyone observing closely. The CEO continued to mock, unaware that his behavior, instead of demonstrating dominance, revealed insecurity masked as superiority, while the single dad's calm response underscored the quiet power that comes from experience, preparation, and emotional control. The single dad's calm reaction was not born out of naivety or fear, but out of years of learning to navigate a world that often judged him harshly for circumstances beyond his control. Each of his movements on that flight, each small gesture toward his child, conveyed a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the CEO's performative arrogance. While the CEO relied on loud words, smirks, and subtle gestures to assert superiority, the single dad demonstrated an authority rooted in presence, attention, and deliberate choice. He did not react immediately to the barbed comments because he understood that giving in to emotion would only amplify the tension the CEO sought to create. Instead, he focused on the immediate needs of his child, the tiny rhythms of care that often go unnoticed, yet reveal the depth of responsibility someone shoulders when parenting alone. His hands moved efficiently, arranging the tablet so that the screen faced the child comfortably, ensuring the headphones were secure, and adjusting the snacks to avoid spillage during takeoff. There was a precision in these motions, a silent language that communicated competence and calm, demonstrating that he had mastered the art of anticipating problems and solving them before they became crises. Every parent knows the subtle panic that can arise when a child is restless or uncomfortable during a flight, and the single dad's careful attention to these small details was a testament to experience earned through countless similar situations. His focus was entirely on providing a sense of security and stability for his child, rather than engaging in a battle of words that could not affect the realities of the responsibilities he carried. Around them, the passengers began to notice the contrast, even if they did not understand the full context. Some watched discreetly, sensing the tension but unsure where to direct their attention. Others observed the CEO's attempts to assert dominance and found themselves slightly uncomfortable with the display of entitlement, recognizing the imbalance of power in a confined space. The single dad, by contrast, exuded a quiet confidence that did not demand attention but nevertheless commanded it. There was a sense of resilience in his demeanor, a recognition that true strength is often subtle, measured not by volume or visibility, but by the capacity to remain composed under pressure and maintain focus on what truly matters. The CEO, meanwhile, appeared increasingly frustrated by the lack of reaction. He seemed to operate under the assumption that sarcasm and ridicule would force a response, that the social script he had mastered in boardrooms and social circles would apply here as well. He underestimated the single dad's patience, interpreting the calm silence as submission rather than strength. Every smirk, every whispered comment, every glance that carried judgment was met not with anger but with a steady, deliberate composure. This composure was a form of quiet resistance, a refusal to validate the CEO's attempts at social dominance. The single dad's eyes occasionally flicked toward the CEO, not in confrontation, but in acknowledgement of the tension, a way to observe without escalating, to remain grounded while still aware of the dynamics unfolding beside him. What makes the single dad's reaction compelling is the balance between attentiveness and restraint. He was not passive, nor was he oblivious. Every gesture, every glance, was intentional, a careful calibration of presence in the midst of provocation. His focus on the child was not merely practical. It was symbolic, demonstrating that the measure of responsibility and competence cannot be reduced to social appearances or superficial displays of superiority. Parenting, particularly as a single parent, requires a constant negotiation between problem-solving, emotional intelligence, and anticipation of needs, and the single dad embodied these qualities without the need for acknowledgement or praise. The contrast between the two men became even more apparent as the flight continued. The CEO's energy, fueled by the need to assert status, grew more performative with each passing minute. He leaned back in his seat, adjusted his tie, and punctuated minor comments with laughter that seemed designed to elicit attention and approval. The single dad, meanwhile, maintained a steady rhythm of care and observation, his responses measured, precise, and entirely grounded in the reality of the moment. There was no need for performative gestures, no need for validation, only an unspoken confidence that comes from experience, from having navigated countless challenges where real stakes are involved, where judgment is often external and support is limited. Even the child seemed to sense the difference, responding more readily to the calm and organized energy of the parent than to the distractions of social posturing from the seat beside them. The subtle focus on creating a safe, predictable, and comfortable environment contrasted sharply with the CEO's focus on external perception, demonstrating how presence and intention can shape a space more effectively than words or superficial displays of authority. Passengers nearby, whether consciously or unconsciously, began to register the dynamic. The CEO's attempts at ridicule created tension, but the single dad's calm reaction offered a model of stability and contrast, revealing that courage and competence are not always loud or immediately visible, that real influence often comes from the ability to maintain composure under pressure while prioritizing what truly matters. The pilot's emergency announcement, cutting through the cabin's routine hum, was sudden and commanding, a sharp contrast to the previously simmering tension between the CEO and the single dad. "Any fighter pilot on board?" The voice over the intercom boomed, clear and urgent, and immediately, the atmosphere shifted in a way that only a true emergency can provoke. Passengers stiffened, scanning each other in disbelief, some gripping their armrests, others whispering questions to neighbors. As the words echoed in the confined space of the airplane, the CEO's smirk faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of unease, as if he had been abruptly reminded that his position, wealth, and social superiority held no sway over the immediate demands of reality, that no amount of boardroom confidence could substitute for actual capability when real stakes are on the line. The single dad, sitting beside him, remained calm, but the subtle shift in his posture suggested a readiness, a natural response that had been honed through years of facing challenges and emergencies that rarely drew attention or praise. His hands moved slightly to ensure his child was secure in the seat, the seatbelt adjusted perfectly, a small but crucial action that demonstrated awareness of immediate priorities without succumbing to panic. There was a quiet strength in this, a preparedness rooted not in training as a fighter pilot, but in the everyday discipline of navigating life's unexpected emergencies. In that moment, he embodied the principle that composure and readiness are more powerful than posturing or intimidation, that real competence is revealed under pressure rather than declared beforehand. The cabin responded collectively to the announcement in subtle ways. Some passengers rose halfway from their seats, scanning faces, looking for anyone who might respond. Others whispered urgently, trying to process the meaning of the pilot's call and what it implied about the situation ahead. The air, already charged by the earlier tension, thickened with anticipation and fear. Yet within this heightened atmosphere, the single dad's calm, measured actions stood out. He was a figure of focus, a pivot around which the passengers' collective anxiety seemed to stabilize, a reminder that someone's steady presence can serve as a subtle anchor in moments of uncertainty. Meanwhile, the CEO's reaction was more visible, more immediate, betraying the cracks in the facade he had maintained throughout the flight. His eyes widened slightly, a rapid glance scanning the cabin, registering the sudden seriousness of the situation. The laughter and smirks that had defined his previous behavior evaporated, replaced by a sharp, almost instinctive calculation of risk and self-preservation. For someone used to influencing outcomes through social dominance, this moment underscored a harsh reality. Titles, wealth, and superficial confidence matter little when confronted with circumstances that demand real skill and decisive action. The abruptness of the announcement forced him to face his limitations in a way that no quiet confrontation could, and the shift in his demeanor was perceptible not just to the single dad beside him, but to the passengers around him who had witnessed his previous behavior. As the seconds stretched, the announcement's urgency became more apparent, and the psychological dynamics in the cabin shifted dramatically. The single dad, still attending quietly to his child, displayed an unspoken readiness, a calm vigilance that contrasted sharply with the CEO's visible tension. There was an elegance in this restraint, a demonstration of how competence and focus are expressed not through noise or attention-seeking behavior, but through deliberate, measured actions in response to emerging circumstances. The passengers who had been observing, some previously entertained by the CEO's display, now saw the stark difference between someone accustomed to commanding attention and someone whose actions reflected actual preparedness and responsibility. This moment illuminated the gap between superficial authority and functional capability, between the performance of power and the quiet application of skill and judgment under pressure. The pilot's call for a fighter pilot was a catalyst, a sudden lens through which the cabin's social hierarchy, previously shaped by confidence and entitlement, was reframed in terms of practical reality. The single dad's composed response highlighted the nature of real competence, the ability to focus on essential priorities, assess situations calmly, and act responsibly without the need for validation or applause. His experience, honed through years of navigating life independently, manifested in subtle gestures and attentiveness that contrasted sharply with the CEO's reaction, revealing that true preparedness is often invisible until tested by crisis. Around them, passengers' attention became increasingly divided, some observing the subtle heroism of the single dad, others grappling with their own fears, and a few questioning how easily assumptions based on appearances can mislead. The announcement served as a reminder that emergencies strip away social performance, that true capability is revealed not in words or posturing but in the clarity of response, the focus on immediate priorities, and the presence of mind to navigate unexpected challenges. Effectively, the shift in passengers' perceptions was immediate yet complex, a subtle transformation that occurs when human instincts confront reality in a way that words alone cannot describe. For the entire flight up until that point, most eyes had been drawn to the CEO, to his confident posturing, his smirks, and the performative gestures that seemed designed to command attention. People instinctively gauge authority based on visible cues, clothing, demeanor, speech, and social presence. And the CEO had expertly leveraged every one of these indicators to establish a sense of dominance over the surrounding space. Yet, the pilot's announcement acted as a lens, reframing what mattered in that moment and forcing the passengers to reevaluate their implicit assumptions about competence and worth. Suddenly, the external signs of authority held little meaning in the face of an urgent, real-world challenge that demanded skill, focus, and calmness rather than status or social pretense. The single dad, previously a quiet figure in the background of the cabin's social landscape, became the focal point not because he sought attention, but because his composed demeanor contrasted so starkly with the escalating tension around him. Passengers noticed the subtle confidence in his movements, the deliberate care with which he ensured his child was prepared for the situation, and the absence of panic in his gaze. His attention was grounded, immediate, and purposeful, and these qualities, though quiet, conveyed far more credibility than the CEO's earlier displays of verbal dominance. People began to subconsciously adjust their impressions, recognizing that the loudest voice in the room is not necessarily the one capable of meeting real challenges. The single dad's presence became a stabilizing force, a reference point against which the flight's social dynamics suddenly shifted. Those seated nearby observed the CEO with growing curiosity, noting the change in his demeanor as the announcement settled over the cabin. His gestures became more tentative, his laughter vanished, and his eyes betrayed a subtle, almost imperceptible worry that had been absent moments before. Where he had once embodied confidence through performance, he now seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of uncertainty. The audience, who had previously unconsciously endorsed his authority, now recognized that the qualities necessary to assert social dominance were insufficient in the face of real stakes. There was a cognitive dissonance unfolding, a collective realization that previous judgments based on appearances, social cues, and performative confidence were unreliable predictors of actual capability. Meanwhile, the single dad's reaction, calm and deliberate, began to shape the environment. Passengers, observing his focus on what truly mattered, safety, preparation, and attentiveness to his child, felt a subtle sense of reassurance, a transfer of confidence through silent example rather than overt assertion. The contrast between his composed action and the CEO's faltering gestures illustrated a universal truth, that character and capability often reveal themselves under pressure, not in the artificial theater of social posturing. It became apparent that the measures of respect and attention are dynamic, dependent not on assumed hierarchies but on the ability to respond effectively when circumstances demand it. Even for those not immediately aware of the nuances between the two men, the visual and emotional cues were powerful. The way the single dad adjusted the seatbelt, checked the child's headphones, and ensured the tablet was secured projected a grounded competence that reassured those around him. Passengers instinctively read these signals, interpreting subtle behaviors as indicators of reliability and calmness under pressure. In contrast, the CEO's previously admired gestures now appeared performative and superficial, emphasizing style over substance, appearance over meaningful action. The psychological shift was profound, revealing how quickly perception can pivot when reality imposes itself upon social assumptions and hierarchies. Beyond the immediate observations, there was a deeper lesson emerging in the cabin. The passengers, now alert to the urgency of the announcement, began to reassess not only the individuals involved but also their own internal biases about authority and capability. The CEO had relied on conventional signals, clothing, posture, conversational dominance, to command respect, while the single dad's quiet competence revealed a more authentic form of authority grounded in preparedness and emotional resilience. The contrast was instructive, showing that respect earned in calm circumstances may be shallow, but credibility demonstrated under pressure carries weight that is recognized instinctively and enduringly. Subtle glances exchanged between passengers reflected this new understanding, as whispers and murmurs circulated, each remark acknowledging the discrepancy between appearance and reality. The shift in perception was not immediate for everyone, but it was undeniably present, a social recalibration influenced by the single dad's composed behavior, the CEO's faltering demeanor, and the shared awareness that true preparedness is not performative but actionable. The cabin, once a microcosm of assumed hierarchies and casual judgment, had become a space where real competence was illuminated by necessity and observation, transforming how every passenger evaluated authority, confidence, and courage in real time. The broader lesson of courage, humility, and judgment under pressure began to crystallize as the moments on the flight unfolded, revealing truths that were often overlooked in everyday life, but impossible to ignore in a moment of genuine urgency. The single dad, quietly attending to his child while the CEO's performative arrogance faltered, embodied a type of strength that goes unrecognized until it is tested by circumstances beyond one's control. His focus on responsibility and preparation, the calm decisiveness in every motion, highlighted how real courage is rarely loud or dramatic. It exists in the ability to maintain clarity under pressure, to prioritize what truly matters, and to act without seeking validation or applause. In contrast, the CEO's reliance on superficial displays of dominance, verbal bravado, and social hierarchy was exposed for what it truly was: a fragile facade that could not withstand even a minor disruption in circumstances, a reminder that confidence built on appearances alone is vulnerable when reality intervenes. The reactions of the passengers amplified this lesson. People unconsciously calibrate their perception of others based on observable behaviors, and in this confined environment, the distinction between posturing and genuine competence became starkly apparent. Eyes that had previously admired the CEO for his apparent confidence now tracked the single dad, noting the precision of his movements, the attention to detail in securing his child's comfort, and the unspoken assurance that radiated from his calm demeanor. It became clear that authority and respect are not dictated by social titles, wealth, or outward appearances, but by the ability to act responsibly and decisively when circumstances demand it, to navigate uncertainty with composure, and to provide stability in a situation that could easily provoke fear or chaos. The dynamic in the cabin transformed as passengers collectively absorbed this realization, each individual internalizing the contrast between the two men's approaches. The single dad's calm presence functioned as a subtle lesson in humility for the CEO, illustrating that true leadership and influence do not require domination or ridicule, but are instead expressed through readiness, attentiveness, and the quiet strength of purposeful action. Observers began to see that judgment based solely on superficial measures, appearance, verbal wit, or social rank, can be misleading, and that real competence is most reliably demonstrated under conditions of pressure and unpredictability. This shift in perception carried with it a subtle sense of respect that was not demanded, but earned naturally, simply by embodying responsibility and skill in the moment. The situation also highlighted the interplay between courage and vulnerability. The single dad's courage was not a flamboyant display of heroism, but a quiet, consistent commitment to doing what was necessary for his child's safety and well-being, even in the presence of someone who had attempted to diminish him socially. This type of courage, rooted in responsibility, empathy, and preparedness, differs from the bravado the CEO had exhibited, showing that true heroism is measured less by social performance and more by the capacity to act effectively under pressure while maintaining ethical and practical priorities. The passengers, consciously or not, absorbed this contrast, understanding intuitively that reliability and resilience are far more valuable than superficial confidence in moments that truly matter. Even the CEO's behavior, when observed closely, became instructive. His visible discomfort, the subtle faltering of gestures that had previously been assured, illustrated the fragility of authority based solely on social dominance. It revealed that self-perception and external perception can diverge sharply, and that people who rely on posturing may find themselves unprepared when circumstances demand substantive action. The juxtaposition between the single dad's quiet competence and the CEO's exposed vulnerability functioned as a real-time lesson in social judgment, demonstrating that assumptions about ability, responsibility, and character are often incomplete or flawed unless tested by context and pressure. The child's presence added an additional dimension to the lesson, underscoring the stakes involved and the importance of prioritization. The single dad's attention was consistently directed toward the child's immediate needs, highlighting the essence of responsibility in action. His gestures, adjusting the seatbelt, securing the headphones, checking the tablet, and ensuring that the child felt safe and calm, were subtle yet powerful indicators of competence and care, and they amplified the broader lesson for everyone observing. Courage, after all, is not only about responding to dramatic emergencies but also about consistently attending to responsibilities, making deliberate choices, and exercising judgment in situations that directly impact others. As the flight continued, the atmosphere of the cabin subtly shifted from tension to quiet recognition. Passengers were no longer solely focused on appearances or prior assumptions. Instead, they were attuned to actions, to evidence of capability under pressure, to the contrast between superficial dominance and authentic competence. The broader lesson became unmistakable. Judgment should be tempered by observation of real behavior rather than assumption. Humility should guide interactions even in positions of perceived power, and courage manifests most convincingly in quiet, consistent, and deliberate action when it is needed most. The interplay of these principles was demonstrated in real time through the contrasting behaviors of the single dad and the CEO, providing a vivid example of how human character, capability, and influence are revealed under pressure.